The black bride was rejected because of her skin color until everything changed when a millionaire farmer saw in her the perfect half. The man swallowed hard, his face pale, as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. This isn't right. You didn't say that. That I'm black, Aaliyah said softly, finishing the sentence Lucas Bennett couldn't bring himself to say. Her heart sank like a stone dropped from a great height, right there on the platform where she stood, her head held high beneath the delicate silk hat she had bought, especially for this occasion now, looking painfully out of place and almost laughable in the midst of her humiliation. 3 weeks of travel, 6 months of exchanging passionate letters, a trunk filled with hope, and a promise of a new beginning far from the racial prejudice of the cities. All of it crumbled in an instant the moment Lucas laid eyes on her for the first time. In your letters, you wrote beautifully. I imagined, he stammered, stepping back. The bouquet in his hand seemed to wilt before their eyes, dampened by his sweaty grip. You should have warned me. Aaliyah took a deep breath, trying to gather what little dignity she had left. Warn you about what? That my skin is dark as night, but my feelings are just as real as yours? That I may not be white, but I can still love and be loved? You never asked. Lucas glanced nervously around the platform, his eyes darting to the curious stares of passengers and station staff. In a small town like Riverbrook, the arrival of a well-dressed black woman was enough to draw attention, let alone the spectacle of being publicly rejected by a white man. People won't understand. This community, my business, he mumbled, stepping back further. I can pay for your ticket back. You seem educated, I'm sure you understand. Aaliyah felt a chill run down her spine, not from sorrow, but from a controlled surge of anger. In his letters, Lucas had written of the lonely heart of a 45-year-old widower, yearning for companionship and a second chance at love. But he had never once mentioned that such a heart came with conditions about skin color. I used all my savings to come here, she said, her voice steady even as she trembled inside. I have nowhere to go back to. Lucas pulled a crumpled wad of cash from his coat pocket. This should be enough for you to stay a few days. Then you'll figure something out. At that very moment, a deep male voice shattered the tense silence like thunder on a clear day. That's how you deal with problems, Bennett? Throw money at them and hope they disappear like always? A tall man stepped in from behind Lucas, his sharp eyes locked onto the shrinking businessman. He was dressed simply, but the quality of the fabric and the precision of the tailoring radiated a quiet wealth, the kind of understated elegance only the truly affluent dared to wear. The man's sun-weathered face, lined with the quiet testimony of countless days beneath the open sky, suggested a lifetime of labor and solitude under the unforgiving elements. His skin bore the deep tan and creases of a man familiar with wind, sun, and time itself, yet despite that rugged exterior, his posture remained unmistakably commanding. There was a quiet strength in the way he stood, upright, grounded, and utterly unshaken, as if the world might shift around him, but he would not bend. This has nothing to do with you, Miller, Lucas said, his voice trembling not with fear, but with something heavier, raw. His eyes didn't quite meet the old man's, as if even now, in this moment, he knew the weight of the presence before him. It does when I witness someone I've known for 15 years act like a coward, the man, Ethan Miller, replied, then turned to Aaliyah, his gaze softening. Ma'am, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Ethan Miller. I own a farm on the outskirts of town. Aaliyah nodded cautiously. Life had taught her that kindness from strangers often came with conditions. If I may, Ethan continued, I'd like to offer you a place to stay at my home until you decide your next step. We have a guest room that's rarely used, and my housekeeper would be delighted to have someone to talk to. Lucas choked on his words, his breath catching somewhere between his chest and throat, as if the truth had become too sharp to speak aloud. The silence that followed was tense, palpable, thick enough to cut through. Across from him, Ethan offered a smile, cold, calculated, and perfectly controlled, the kind of smile that curled at the edges without ever touching his eyes. It was the expression of a man who had already run the numbers and knew the outcome would tilt in his favor. "The people who'll gossip," he said slowly, savoring the weight of each word. "You mean the same ones who do business with me every single day?" He leaned in slightly, voice calm but edged like a knife under velvet. "I'm quite curious to hear what they'll have to say." Lucas fell silent, his mouth slightly open, as if words had started to form but never found their way out. There was nothing more to say. Ethan Miller wasn't just a farmer, and everyone in Riverbrook knew it. He was the man behind most of the harvest, the quiet force whose name was on deeds stretching from the rolling hills to the riverbanks. He owned more than half of the arable land in the entire region, not through inheritance or scandal, but through persistence, vision, and the kind of grit that made others uneasy. His silence carried weight. His gaze, when fixed, could still a room. What no one at the station knew at that moment, as the whistle of the afternoon train faded into the golden hush of the prairie, was that Aaliyah, with her gloved hands clutching the worn leather handle of her trunk, carried more than clothing and keepsakes. Folded among the fabric and old letters was a secret, fragile yet potent one that could shift the entire balance of power in Riverbrook. And when it came to light, it would burn through the polite facades and backroom alliances like wildfire through dry grass. It would leave Lucas Bennett staring at the wreckage of his own legacy, regretting perhaps for the rest of his life that he had let skin color cloud his judgment. Ethan Miller's farm was far from the modest homestead he had once described. It was a grand Victorian estate, surrounded by hundreds of acres of fertile farmland and sweeping green pastures where purebred horses grazed lazily beneath the golden light of late afternoon. As Ethan's carriage rolled through the wrought iron gates, Aaliyah sat in silence, unable to hide her astonishment. The splendor of the place far exceeded anything she had imagined, and with it came a quiet wariness. "People around here aren't used to difference," Ethan said quietly, gesturing toward the main house with its wide verandas and large windows overlooking the gardens. Riverbrook was built by old families, and most of them still choose to live in the past. Lucas Bennett is just a symptom of a much deeper illness. Mrs. Destiny Housekeeper, a silver-haired woman with a neat bun and a composed, dignified air, welcomed Aaliyah with a politeness that felt entirely natural, not the least bit strained. If she was surprised by the presence of a black guest, she gave no sign of it. "I've prepared the blue room, the one with the best view of the garden," she said, leading Aaliyah down a hallway adorned with oil paintings, bronze sculptures, and antique chairs whose hand-stitched patterns had faded gracefully with time. That evening, dinner was served in the grand dining room, with its high ceilings and glittering crystal chandelier. Amid the space that felt both warm and solemn, Ethan shared his story. The son of a northern banker and a schoolteacher who had been active in the abolitionist movement, he had inherited not only a vast fortune but also a deep-seated belief in justice and equality. "When I moved to Riverbrook 15 years ago, people called me eccentric, too wealthy to be ostracized, but too different to be fully accepted." "And you, Miss Jackson, what's your story?" Ethan asked after detailing the agricultural projects he was overseeing. "Your letters must have made quite the impression for Lucas to extend such a formal invitation." Aaliyah hesitated, but the calm and straightforward gaze in Ethan's eyes made her feel she could be open. "I used to be a teacher in Boston. I taught literature and history at a school for young girls of color. When the school shut down due to lack of funding, I knew I had to start over somewhere else." What Aaliyah hadn't mentioned was the real reason behind her correspondence with Lucas. an unexpected inheritance from her grandfather, a man who had spent his life as a servant to a wealthy family. He left her not only his carefully saved gold and silver, but also a collection of old documents including land ownership papers that could alter the fate of the entire Riverbrook region. She had hidden them carefully in the false bottom of her trunk. In the days that followed, Ethan gave Aaliyah something she had never been offered anywhere else: space to think. The Miller Estate's library was a treasure trove of knowledge, thousands of old books, legal documents, maps, and records of local history. Aaliyah immersed herself in studying every worn page, often spending entire afternoons bathed in sunlight filtering through the curtains, meticulously taking notes in her careful hand. When asked, she simply smiled softly and said, "I'm expanding my understanding." A week after her arrival, rumors of the Black Lady at Mr. Miller's estate spread throughout Riverbrook. Unexpected visits began to increase. Merchants' wives, curious neighbors, even the elderly pastor all suddenly found reasons to stop by the estate. "You haven't even stepped outside town, and you've already become the hottest topic of gossip," Ethan muttered during an afternoon tea. "They think I'm either hiding a treasure or starting a scandal." Aaliyah took a sip of her tea, her lips curling into a faint, bittersweet smile. "I've always been the unusual one, Mr. Miller. The only difference this time is that I'm holding the porcelain cup instead of pouring the tea." One drizzly afternoon, Lucas Bennett finally appeared unannounced, clutching an old fedora, his face tense as if he were carrying the weight of the whole town on his shoulders. "Miller," he greeted softly, his voice edged with unease. "I just stopped by to see if Miss Jackson is all right." "She's perfectly comfortable," Ethan replied curtly, flipping through a large ledger without looking up. "Why don't you ask her yourself?" At that moment, Aaliyah entered. She wore one of the elegant dresses Mrs. Destiny had tailored, especially for her soft plum fabric with delicate white lace trim. Her hair was neatly pinned up, and her deep, dark eyes held a calmness laced with quiet sharpness. She was no longer the weary woman from the train station that day. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice as cold and smooth as winter silk. "What a surprise to see you again." Lucas fumbled with the hat in his hands, turning it nervously. What I mean is, our community is very concerned about your situation. You're a single woman living in the home of an unmarried man. That's not exactly appropriate, especially since you are black," Ethan finished for him, his voice smooth as a blade gliding across a whetstone. "Go on, Bennett. I'm curious to hear how you intended to end that sentence." Lucas swallowed hard, his face pale. "The church committee is considering raising funds to help you return to Boston." Aaliyah smiled, but it was a paper-thin smile, one that never reached her eyes. "How generous, but I'm afraid I have no intention of leaving Riverbrook. In fact, I've just accepted a position here." "That's impossible," Lucas stammered. You have no family here, no employment." "Now I do," she replied calmly. "Mr. Miller has offered me the position of librarian. Apparently, his family's library hasn't been properly organized in generations." Lucas turned to Ethan, his ears flushed red with frustration. "You've got to be joking." Ethan shrugged, his expression calm and unbothered. "I never joke about serious matters. Miss Jackson is educated, methodical, and possesses a remarkable patience. My library is coming back to life because of her." What Lucas didn't know was that within that dusty library, Aaliyah had been quietly piecing together fragments, maps, copies of land records, and long-forgotten entries that had once been deliberately torn from the town's official history. That evening, as the glow of oil lamps bathed the old wooden walls in warm gold, Aaliyah sat in the library, spreading the documents across the table. Yellowed parchment, faded ink, seals blurred by time. Mrs. Destiny quietly brought in a tray of tea. She didn't ask any questions, but the brief look in her eyes seemed to say, "I see you and I respect you." In the stillness of the night, Aaliyah turned to a copy of a land record dated 1866. The original document clearly stated the state government had granted ownership of over 400 acres to Mr. Proppen, Caleb Thompson, a free black man after the Civil War, and her direct ancestor. But Thompson had been forced off that land just a few years later, when the town council, led by none other than Lucas's ancestor, declared him morally unfit to hold property. They had established something called the Riverbrook Land Ownership Committee, supposedly to protect local resources. But in truth, it served to illegally redistribute land stolen from a black man who had once placed his faith in justice. Aaliyah felt a pulse echo through her veins. It wasn't just outrage, it was the clear, steady awareness that this truth would change everything. 2 weeks later, the Riverbrook Town Hall was packed to the rafters. Rumors of an emergency meeting had spread like wildfire. Founding families, merchants, the pastor, landowners, all were present. On their faces, confusion, guarded concern, and in a few, a nameless, creeping fear they couldn't yet articulate. In the center of the room, Lucas Bennett was speaking as though he were the voice of the town's moral conscience. "This is a disgrace," he thundered. "Miller is openly dismantling our traditions by harboring a woman like that in his home. Respectable families are deeply concerned." A murmur swept through the crowd. A few nodded. Others exchanged uneasy glances. The town hall doors suddenly swung open. Ethan Miller entered, calm as ever, with a presence that seemed to still the entire room. Beside him walked Aaliyah Jackson-Tall, regal, her steps slow and steady like a queen who needed no crown. She wore a dark, elegant dress, her hair neatly pinned high, and in her hand she carried an old leather case of documents. In the stifling air of the hall, each step she took echoed like a bell tolling for the truth. "I appreciate the invitation," Ethan spoke, his voice resonating across the chamber. "But there's a misunderstanding that must be addressed. Miss Jackson is not here as my guest. She is the legal representative in a matter of importance that concerns all of you." "Legal representative?" Lucas scoffed. "A colored woman with no title or authority. Miller, have you lost your mind?" Aaliyah didn't respond right away. She opened her case and pulled out a series of old documents, carefully laminated and preserved. Her voice was steady and composed, as if she were delivering a lecture to the most important class of her life. "I am not only a state-certified educator," she said. "I also have legal standing as the direct descendant of Mr. Caleb Thompson." That name dropped into the room like thunder on a clear day. The elders in the room turned pale. The old pastor lowered his head. Lucas shouted in fury, "Caleb Thompson isn't real. He's just a myth, a made-up story." "That's strange," Aaliyah replied evenly, placing a thick stack of documents before the council. "Because right here, I have the original land deed signed by the state governor in 1866, granting Mr. Thompson 400 acres of land, including the very store you currently own, Mr. Bennett." Judge Thornton, a silver-haired man who had long held a place of respect in Riverbrook, took the documents, slipped on his glasses, and read carefully. His brow furrowed. Then he looked up, his expression grave. "These appear to be authentic." "Fake! They're fake!" Lucas shouted, but his voice had lost its certainty. Sweat poured down his face. Aaliyah remained unshaken. "And here are the official records," she said, laying down more documents. "Letters, journal entries, sworn testimonies detailing how Mr. Thompson was forced to leave town in 1870 after repeated threats of lynching. It was around that same time that the so-called founding families established the Riverbrook Land Ownership Committee and divided his land among themselves. Ethan continued, his voice low and steady. My family's library holds copies of all local land records. Strangely enough, the years 1870 to 1872 were completely missing. Until Miss Jackson traced the gaps through marginal legal notations, most people had long forgotten. A heavy silence fell, the kind of silence that comes when truth can no longer be denied. Reverend Miller, the oldest man in the hall, slowly rose to his feet. My father once told me, he said. He called it a buried sin. We all knew, but none of us had the courage to dig it up. Aliyah lifted her head high, her eyes shining with resolve. I didn't come here to punish the descendants for the sins of their ancestors. I came to correct a historical wrong in the fairest way possible. She presented a draft proposal, the Thompson Community Trust, a plan to use the legally inherited land to invest in education, housing, libraries, and social services. No one would be evicted from their homes, but the benefits would be redistributed in a way that no longer crushed the vulnerable. Lucas let out a harsh, bitter laugh. No one's going to believe this circus. Just then, a man in a suit stepped into the room. Jeff Landry, a well-known attorney respected across 3 states, nodded politely, then spoke. The documents have been verified by the State Historical Archives Commission. They are entirely legitimate. And I'd like to inform you all, the lawsuit has already been filed in court. The hall erupted into chaos. Lucas nearly lost control. He lunged toward Aliyah, shouting, You planned this from the beginning. Those letters, you tricked me. Aliyah didn't step back. She showed no fear. She simply looked at him. No, Mr. Bennett. In those letters, I was just a lone woman seeking companionship. But it was your rejection the moment you saw my skin that showed me exactly who you were, and that you would do to me what your ancestors did to my great-grandfather. You destroy us, Lucas whispered, pale and shaken. No, she replied gently. I will rebuild in a way where everyone can stand in the light, and no one has to bow their head because of the color of their skin. 6 months after that fateful day at Town Hall, Riverbrook was no longer the same dusty town clinging to old prejudices. Quiet but powerful changes had spread across the community, like dawn breaking through the thick fog of the past. The Thompson Trust was officially established not as a form of reparations, but as a living commitment by the community to make historical justice the foundation of its future. A new community school was built beside the library, formerly Lucas Bennett's store, now transformed into the town's first public library, a place where no one would ever again be limited by skin color, lineage, or origin. Aliyah Jackson, once rejected on a train platform, was now invited to speak at universities, leading educational programs on land history and civil rights, and featured in major newspapers as a symbol of dignified restoration. She did not carry hatred. She carried vision. Ethan Miller always stood quietly beside her at public ceremonies, not as a protector, but as a true partner. The man who had once stood for justice in a single, pivotal moment was now her lawful husband. Married in a small garden ceremony on the southern grounds of the estate, attended only by a few trusted friends and Mrs. Destiny, who wept gently as she handed over a handkerchief embroidered with the initials A.M. On an autumn afternoon, Aliyah stood on the veranda of the house now officially named the Thompson Miller House, serving both as a historical archive and cultural center. Below, children played in the grass, their laughter echoing in the gentle air, on grounds that had once been reserved for the town's elite. She smiled softly, a cup of hot tea in her hands, freshly brought out by Ethan. "Do you know what truly made Lucas Bennett lose?" she asked quietly. Ethan sat down beside her. "Blind pride?" he guessed. Aaliyah shook her head. "No, it was the limits of his imagination. He couldn't imagine that a black woman, rejected, could still forgive and want to build something greater. It was that smallness of vision that ultimately drowned him." Lucas Bennett left town just weeks after everything came to light. He sold off his assets in haste, at a fraction of their worth. Rumor had it he was now working as a clerk at a small shop in a neighboring town. No one spoke of him much anymore, like a shadow that had vanished with the morning light. "You could have taken everything," Ethan said, as the two of them looked out over the garden. "But I didn't," Aaliyah replied. "I don't need revenge. I want everyone to live without having to bow their heads, even those who once believed they ruled." In the center of Riverbrook's main square, once marked only by monuments honoring white founding families, there now stood a modest bronze plaque, hand-engraved, in memory of Caleb Thompson, who sowed the seeds of justice with blood, sweat, and faith, so that generations to come might harvest the fruits of freedom. Beneath the main inscription, in smaller lines, "This land was once taken. Now it returns to serve all the children of this town, regardless of color, creed, or name." That night, under the high moon, Aaliyah sat on the stone steps of the Thompson Miller house, the wind gently brushing against her coat. Ethan arrived, carrying 2 cups of cinnamon tea. They sat together, saying nothing for several minutes, because silence, too, can carry meaning. "You know," Aaliyah whispered, "when Lucas saw me that day on the platform, he saw his own limits. But when you saw me, you saw a possibility." "I saw a fire no one could extinguish," Ethan replied softly. They lightly touched the porcelain cups together. No slogans, no retaliation. Aaliyah had won through dignity, through intellect, through vision, and through something even deeper, a belief that true change does not come from conflict, but from resolute, unresentful action. Aaliyah Jackson Miller had once come to Riverbrook as someone rejected, but she left that train platform to step into history, not as someone who sought revenge, but as someone who builds. And that was what made her not only belong to the town, but become a part of its lifeblood forever.